Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. We are waking up with watches, starting our weekend, and everything you see on this show is for sale. Reach out to me directly, that's tmosso at thewatchbox.com, for any questions you have, from pricing to accessories to condition. Rolling over to the other side. And mindful that you may be wishing to sell or trade a watch, I am always looking to buy and build inventory. One watch or an entire collection, we pay fast, we pay cash, no upper limit on value paid. We will buy an entire collection of Grubel Forsey. That email address is tmosso at thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell. So let's jump straight into the clickbait. I promised you Rolex, and I plan to deliver. Elemental as Rolex goes. Here we have two of the oldest constants in the Rolex catalog, the Oyster Perpetual dating back to 1933 and the Datejust back to 1945. I promised you the OP41, and here it is right here, reference 124300, launched in mid-2020, the first ever 41mm Oyster Perpetual, which is to say it wears larger than in the past. It has the new caliber 3230, 70-hour power reserve movement, 100 meters water-resistant, automatic, well-loomed, shock-resistant, and anti-magnetic. You can see it is large, broad, and impressive, though under 12mm thick. It's wide, flat, and saucer-like, quite attractive, and I must say, it's more of a tonneau case in profile than a true round case, but it sits on my wrist like a limpet, and as you can see, easily sliding underneath a dress cuff. Big upgrade for the new Oyster Perpetuals, the adjustment system known as Easy Link. Snap in, snap out, 5mm of adjustment, tool-free, the equivalent of adding or removing one full-size link. That is important because previously the Oyster Perpetual did not include that. Now jump into the Datejust. This is the traditional Datejust 36 that was debuted back in 1945, and in 1954 it gained the Cyclops Eye magnifier. This is a lovely example because it has a domed bezel in contrast to the standard flat conical steel that you normally see. Full oyster bracelet, so this is a sportier example, made all the more so by a fully loomed dial in rich white lacquer. Now this is also an amusing example. Make sure we're not in the date change zone. We are. As you can see, it is a roulette date. The evens are black, the odds are red. Wonderful fun to play with, and a great piece of horological theater. As with the Oyster Perpetual, you just saw 100 meters, water-resistant, shock-resistant, anti-magnetic, chronometer certified. This one has a 48-hour automatic winding power reserve, and you can see nicely made. There's some difference in the clasp. The Oyster Perpetual is a little bit more of a basic watch, so you can see there's less internal finishing inside the clasp, and externally the Datejust has a full straight-through polish. Here it's all satin. You can also see the difference between the embossed and the raised and relieved Rolex coronet, as well as the difference in bracelet finishing. The Datejust a little bit more upscale with polished centers, here all of satin finish. But remember, the more advanced movement is in the Oyster Perpetual 41. Throw this watch on the wrist and you can see it wears beautifully. 36mm is the perfect size, and on my 16cm circumference wrist, this would be my choice. As much as I would love a OP41 with a blue or green dial, this one is handsome and versatile. It's your sports watch, it's your dress watch, it's a unisex option, so it brings a lot to the table in that regard. We may as well do some Rolex lume shots real quick to highlight that these are of two different eras. The Datejust prior to Chromalite with conventional superluminova, the OP41 with blue Chromalite, that's Rolex's proprietary lume blend. Now jump into a watch that likewise is visually spectacular after dark. Have you already ID'd it? Well, in case you haven't, keep in mind this is an internal rotating dive bezel, and the entire bezel is loomed, so it's quite easy to judge the minute hand relative to the bezel, and easy to keep track even in the dark of elapsed time. So what is it? Well, launched in 2013, it is the 42mm Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Diver Black Ceramic. So nearly indelible, that is almost scratch-proof black ceramic. It's a combination of titanium sapphire and CE. As a result, it is very light on the wrist. Diver-style strap, manufacturer movement, 60-hour power reserve, automatic winding, 300 meters water resistant. It is an ISO 6425 diver, so this is a real dive watch, not just a style and sports watch. As you can see, it's a little bit thinner than the chronograph because there's no modular chronograph complication there, and it's finished the same way that the metal Royal Oaks and Offshores are, which is to say you have those lovely breaks between polish and satin, rounded and angular facets, and then the watch itself sits fairly well given how big it is. It's about 54mm from lug to lug. I recommend it for a wrist no smaller than 15cm circumference, but it is nice and light for an offshore, and it does have that diver strap, which is more flexible than the conventional offshore chronograph's hornback alligator leather. We have another loom shot, though oddly here, a vintage-inspired dress watch. Can you guess? If I get close, you might even be able to see the name on the dial, but this is the 2012 Jaeger-LeCoultre Grand Reverso Ultra Thin Tribute to 1931 US Edition Mark II. The first one came out in 2011 in 100 pieces with a unique dial and a Casafaliano strap. It was so popular, JLC minted another 100 for the 2012 model year, and this is of that second flight. Beautifully proportioned, it's a tribute to the very first 1931 Reverso with a case by Wenger, a movement by Tavannes, and a patented design by Alfred René Chavot. So very little of it was actually LeCoultre, since they weren't making the case, they weren't making the movement, they didn't design the mechanism. They printed just Reverso on the dial, and that's what we have right here. Now, of course, today the case and the movement both made by Jaeger-LeCoultre, but this is a tribute to the past and a very faithful one. It's not a small watch, however, 46 millimeters from lug to lug, from side to side 27.5 millimeters, and it is 7.4 millimeters thick, which is extraordinary given that it has a separate rotating case built into an external chassis. As with the original Reverso, which was designed as a sports watch, it was hard to break the crystal when it was rotated, so back then the crystal literally would have been glass, vulnerable when you could see the time, relatively invulnerable when you rotate the case. Important because at the time there was no such thing as plexiglass. Moreover, the watch quickly became, even in its day, a canvas for customization. Engravings, dedications, lacquering, enamel, all of that is still possible with this unmarred caseback. You have engine turning internally, you have a satin finished caseback. The watch has a caliber 822, manual wind, 45-hour power reserve. The movement is shaped for the case. And then we have a Fagliano collection strap. The original strap here would have been Casa Fagliano manufacture. This one is made by the OEM supplier of straps to JLC, Camille Fournet, in the style designed by Casa Fagliano, and then you have this lovely distressed leather on the outside. So it is a JLC factory strap. We can, if you wish, order the Fagliano strap that originally came with it, but it is extensively back ordered and there will be a wait. Throw this watch on the wrist. Cuts a striking figure. As you can see, though it's not a huge watch, it is broad, and the shape of the Reverso means that I probably wouldn't recommend this watch for wrists smaller than 14 centimeters circumference, even though at face value, 46 millimeters lug to lug is not huge. This is a watch that probably does need a 14 centimeter and up wrist. Now, if you have a slightly smaller wrist than that, well, let's go with a slightly smaller case. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso Tribute Duo. So a model that came out for the 85th anniversary of the Reverso in 2016. It is a lovely 42.2 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, 25.5 millimeters from side to side, very close in size to the Grand Tie case that debuted with the 60th anniversary Reverso back in 1991. The watch also has some handsome detailing, most notably this lovely gray granular dial with blue hands and applique indices. I like the fact that the seconds track is minimalist. It's not sunken, it doesn't have a surround or a border, it sits atop the dial rather than dominating the dial. You could see that in 2016, JLC started to change the way these were designed, as the interior of the chassis now has an off-centered sunburst pattern, and then the reverse side is no longer perfectly flat, and you can really see that to good advantage when I hold these things side to side, that the caseback of the 1931 is completely flat, whereas the caseback of the 2016 Tribute Duo, it's got a little bit of camber to it. You can see that the edges have a little bit of a ducktail curvature or tuck, so this allows it to fit even better than its bare dimensions suggest. Now, another change that came out that year was the change to an integral setting system for the second time zone. It is a dual time zone, and I'm able to set that second time zone, which has a day-night 24-hour indicator. I can do that with this little trigger that's hidden inside. No longer do I have a trigger on the side of the case or a dimple to mar the lines. Good-looking watch. It actually has a couple of thoughtful features, including pull-tab spring bars. You can quickly remove the strap, but then inside the clasp, there is a trigger that you can push that actually removes the clasp from the strap. So you can remove the clasp from the strap and the strap from the case to swap things up without any tools. A better match for a small wrist here, I can say your wrist can be as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. Of the two, I prefer this one, both for the complication and the size. And that dial is to die for. I should mention, with the U.S. edition, some of the changes that were included were the Casafagliano strap at the time, the use of syringe hands, and then the use of fotina. A standard tribute to 1931 does not include this color of lume, and it does not include these syringe hands. A standard model would include broadsword hands. Let's talk about Patek Philippe. Let's talk about a model launched in 2016. I was at Basel World that year. That was my first Basel World, and I was particularly taken by this watch. As you can see, 39.5 millimeters in white gold with a blue guilloche world time flyback chronograph dial. This is the Patek Philippe world time chronograph. A 5930G010. You can see it is a flyback chronograph. You've got to push it all the way down to get the full benefit. But a flyback chronograph with a 55-hour automatic winding power reserve and a world time complication. Now the fun thing is you set your city of reference. I'm apparently in South Georgia right now. You set it at 12 o'clock and then you change your reference city and the watch does the math. It's a combination of mechanisms developed by Louis Cotier and Patek Philippe from the 1930s through the 1950s. So this is an original. You read the hour adjacent to your city of interest, and then you read the minutes at center. So 24 principal time zones, 24 reference cities, white gold hands, white gold indices. You've got that lovely grand orge or billowing barleycorn pattern. The case itself is quite strong. As you can see, the lugs are stepped out and separate from the case, and then the reverse side, this is the 28-520 movement, best known for its use on the 5960 and the 5980 Nautilus chronograph. Of course, it is a column wheel vertical clutch chrono, 6-position adjusted, free-sprung, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, extensively hand-decorated, 28.8 beat rate, and of course it has that 55-hour power reserve. Throw it on the wrist. It looks substantial. For a wrist 14 centimeters circumference or larger, it's a good choice. It's a little bit chunky, but you can see the case flank is sloped, so it will fit underneath the dress cuff. The lugs have a lot of character, so while this is not a large watch, it's a full-size watch, not an oversized watch. It does have oversized character with a remarkably strong bezel and lug profile that give the impression of a bigger timepiece. Sticking in Geneva and turning the clock back to the late 90s, this was one of the greats of early independent high horology. Back when F.P. Journe was still considering what it would mean to start his own brand, MB&F, De Bethune, Grubel Forsey, none of them existed. Heck, even Urwerk hadn't started until 1997, because back in 1995, Roger Dubuis and Carlos Diaz founded Sogem, a company that was marketed as Roger Dubuis, and this is the first generation product from them, the Sympathie 37 Perpetual Calendar. Geneva hallmark finish, Besançon French observatory chronometer timing, because Roger Dubuis was very traditional. It has a lovely cream-colored lacquer dial, perpetual calendar with double retrogrades, related to a system that Dubuis and Jean-Marc Wiederrecht, later of Agenor, developed in the late 80s for the first Harry Winston high horology watches. You can see that retrograde module perpetual calendar in the Sympathie case, which was developed by I'll take that little bit of glue off the watch, developed by a Valet de Jeu artisan during the 90s for Roger Dubuis. It has 3 matching elements: the dial, the crystal, and the case all feature this lovely drawn form, a combination of curves and sharp creases. It's almost like a piece of molten metal drawn out and then flash frozen. Later versions of the Sympathie were cheapened by the use of a round inner bezel and a round sapphire, a round dial as well. All of this cheaper and easier to make. These original Sympathie models where the case, the bezel, the crystal, and the dial all match shape and contours, these are the most sought. Now underneath the reverse side we have Roger Dubuis caliber 57, which is the Longines L990 in a highly evolved Geneva hallmark finished chronometer grade variant. Automatic winding, 2 mainspring barrels, 44-hour power reserve, and of course it has that perpetual calendar complication added by module. You can see that it is Geneva hallmark, so lovely Côte de Genève, mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges, satination on the wheels, black polish on the screw, and pegwood engine turning on the base plate. This is all the real deal. You can see just how intact this case is. The metal is full, the shapes of the lugs, the points, everything symmetrical and undulled, just as it left Geneva in the 90s. 37 millimeters, but because of the physical strength of the lugs, it does wear a little bit larger. I'd say think of it as a 40 millimeter watch and you get the general idea. Now I'm going to try to put it on my wrist because the strap is brand new, and You could see it fits well. I'd recommend it for a wrist 14 centimeters circumference and up. Roger Dubuis wore this exact model except in rose gold. That's right, Dubuis' personal watch right up to his death was this model in rose gold, so this was his sentimental favorite, and I have to admit, it's mine too. But let's soar high, twice as fly. How high? As high as the sky. The Milky Way, ×2. Launched in 2018, this is the Bethune DB25 Stradivarius. 42 millimeters in grade 5 titanium or rose gold, you have a choice. Both have 6-day power reserves. Both feature handmade fired blue titanium dials. Both feature rose gold hands and hour cabochon. Both of them are mechanically identical with little globes of white gold placed to create the image of the larger celestial bodies. Those little cabochon of gold have been inserted into drillings in the dial, with gold leaf being used to create the remainder of the Milky Way band. Now, of course, the titanium's a bit sportier and more scratch tolerant. Both of these watches are nice and thin, and if you love de Bethune, but you don't like the idea of the DB28's floating lugs or extravagant open dials, keep in mind this company makes its cases, its dials, and its movements just like FP Journe, and a precious few in the independent horology zone. They are making the 3 major parts of the watch in-house. Now, the watch wears light and easy, as at 42 millimeters, the size is right. You can see, as I move away from the camera, proportionally just how good a match this is from my wrist. It slides easily underneath the cuff. The finishing on both watches is exquisite. You can see they are mechanically identical, both of them with patented self-adjusting barrels, triple parachute shock protection system. We'll get a little bit closer so you can better see this. That means you have shock protection by blued spring at the outer corners of the balance bridge. Then you have Inca block for the balance staff at the center. A 2-piece hairspring shaped by hand that beats concentrically like an overcoil without the shock susceptibility of an overcoil. And then you have a balance, one of at least 9 or 10 that de Bethune has patented, and the idea here is no reaction to thermal variation, hot or cold. The watch always keeps the same time. White gold masses at the edge of a blued titanium rim. Very impressive stuff. You can also see that the finishing is high horology with mirrored anglage, abundant black polish, Côte de Bethune, which is like Côte de Genève, but you can see that the abrasive wheel is reversed on each side of the movement, so these darker gradients, they actually face outward on both sides. They'd be unidirectional on conventional movement. And you can see that the entire mechanism anchoring the triple parachute has been fired blue or black polished. And again, a 6-day power reserve. The individual numbering with the nomenclature, that is a solid hand-finished disc of rose gold. And you can see the finishing is equally appealing on both. Take a look at the beveling. It is mirrored anglage, very traditional finish here. Even if the watches are avant-garde, the standards of finish are as you would find at the likes of Vacheron or Laurent Ferrier or Patek Philippe. Very old world and absolutely uncompromised. These watches both include pin buckles. If you love de Bethune, but you do not want to buy a DB28 for aesthetic or sizing reasons, this is the way to go. A company that has made fewer than 3,000 watches since 2002, making about 150 per year today. Remember, Journe is making about 950 per year. This is my favorite brand. Whether you prefer elegance or a more sporty aesthetic, you can't go wrong with these DB25 Stradivarius watches. And again, both 6-day power reserves. Well, let's talk about a value proposition, starting with one of the greats of the 1990s. This is the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter. The Seamaster Diver 300 meter became known as the James Bond watch, as first the quartz model and then later the mechanical chronometer were worn on the wrist of Pierce Brosnan during his turn as 007. But because these watches came out in 1993, through 1997 they would have been made with true tritium dials, and that's what we have here. This is not Fotina. This lovely pumpkin fade is in fact aging radioactive lume. It has a lovely matte black wave dial base, the famed skeleton hands, and a lovely polished bezel. You can see that this one has been worn, and cuff contact over the years has removed some of the lacquered fill, but the case itself is wonderfully intact and minimally, if ever, refinished. This is an honest vintage watch from an era that is increasingly recognized as an era of vintage timepieces. The 90s were a long time ago, and the 30th anniversary of this design will be upon us soon. Wonderfully sharp and vocal bezel action, really a pleasure with that detent, loud and precise, super thin compared to today's coaxial display caseback diver 300 meters. The watch featured a then impressive and today still formidable milled out clasp with trigger release and a fold out dive extension. This made the tinsel-like Rolex Oyster clasps of the time seem like toys by comparison. Still an impressive watch, 41 millimeters. I own the example with the blue anodized aluminum bezel. That was my graduation watch. It's on the never sell list in my collection. I think if you want the most important dive watch of the 1990s, today you bypass Rolex and you go straight to Omega, and it's the Diver 300 meter. For economic reasons, helping to restore Omega as a brand, a lot of its star was refueled and refurbished by the presence of this watch and its prominence during the 90s. It was also one of the best designs of the period, as I can count on one hand how many new sports watch designs from the 90s are still being made almost exactly the same nearly 30 years later. This was an important design, economically important as a comeback watch for Omega, and of course its cultural value from the 007 movies and video games also worth mentioning. Thought I would show you right here that on this watch we have original tritium on the dial and then factory replacement Luminova hands. That tritium will fade toot sweet, but the Luminova hands, all three of them, remain visible, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. An original tritium bezel insert and dial with visible hands that will hold lume after dark. Now, if you want true high horology for substantially less than $10,000, you don't have too many options, but the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin 34 is one of them. Now, I owned this watch with black dial and steel case, and I adored it. The timepiece is only 5.3 millimeters thick with true knife edge profiling. With the case back set back, it actually looks even thinner than 5 millimeters on the wrist. It looks like 3, to be perfectly honest. Wayfish and saucer-like. It has gorgeous but subtle lines. You can see how those lugs blend into the caseband and how the bezel is almost perfectly flat. The timepiece is impressively constructed, almost like a sandwich, as we have these screws that fix the case back in place, but then we also have screws outboard that actually hold the bezel down. So it's a tightly coupled sandwich structure, and this model was introduced in 1994. It has a movement inside based on the ultra-thin 802 Abauche, made in the 1950s for Vacheron and Audemars Piguet, and actually still used by them today. That movement is 1.65 millimeters. This one, a little bit more durable and accurate, is 1.85 millimeters thick, and the finishing on this movement is high horology. Probably the least amount of money you can pay for a genuinely hand-finished movement. If you're wondering why the solid caseback makes the watch thinner. With a display caseback, it's over 6 millimeters thick. With the solid caseback, it is about 5. A very special watch with a full gold deployant clasp. You can see this is JLC's first generation deployant clasp here. Throw it on the wrist, and I have to say, I really like the way it fits. I owned this watch for a long time, always feeling that it was classically beautiful, feeling like a modern-day interpretation of a 1950s Audemars or Vacheron dress watch, and you can see just how flat it looks on the wrist. This is an extraordinary watch that actually gets worked on by the same watchmakers who build complications. When this movement, 849, goes back to the factory, the people who work on the tourbillon and the minute repeater, the perpetual calendars, they work on this watch. This does not go to standard JLC watchmakers. It is that challenging to work on a movement this thin and this fine. It is an extraordinary timepiece and an opportunity to buy a real handmade, handcrafted, hand-tuned watch for less than the price of that Oyster Perpetual you just saw. This is a special piece, and I cannot overstate, but the first ever FP Journe Perpetual calendar has a special place in my heart. Created for the 5th anniversary of FP Journe's Tokyo boutique in 2009, 99 examples of this rose gold and grade 5 titanium perpetual calendar were created. A lovely deep gray dial. It's white gold underneath the gray overcoat. It has gilt style printing, and if you look, you can see that the bezel for the hours, minutes, and seconds, rather than being polished steel, on this edition it's satinated. The bolts on the dial side, rather than being polished steel, here are rose gold. We have some rose gold garnishing on the flank of the case. The watch is a perpetual calendar, while the standard octa calendrier is an annual calendar. This is a perpetual, and it's achieved with a special quantième bissextile February display, which basically means when it is February of a leap year, you actually see two different frames in this aperture, letting you know that it is the leap year February. The watch has a retrograde date and an impressive setting system. We will roll through the date change here. It has an impressive setting system that allows you to set the month using a pusher. First you slide, then you push, and that is the quantième bissextile phase indicator. This is the third year of the cycle, one before the leap year. So you see the 3 next to February. So suddenly we have two separate displays in the one frame. The retrograde date is dynamic and fun to play with. It has a conventional quickset. Journe's notion here was he did not want you to need a tool, nor did he want you to attempt to use a pen to set his perpetual calendar. And he didn't want it to be set accidentally, so you need to move the slide and push the trigger. This watch is rated with a 5-day power reserve, though in fact it runs for about 160 hours. Inside, the movement is made of solid gold. It's a 99-piece limited edition, and it's one of the few I've ever seen on the factory titanium bracelet. That's what really sets this example apart. So while there are 99 of these, precious few have this expensive factory accessory, which completely changes the aesthetic, making it more contemporary, sporting, and versatile, as it reads essentially like a base metal sports watch on the wrist. It is thin, it is light, it is hypoallergenic. It is historically a very important watch. Later on, we had the Journe Perpetual, but this was the first, and you can only be first once. I like to say there's always another edition, but first is a flag that flies forever. Technically impressive, chronometer accurate, and of course with a number of internal refinements ranging from the rose gold movement to the free sprung balance. It's as impressive inside as it is outside, and one of the most collectible FP Journe watches of all time. Now this is a watch I can get for you if you are interested. Launched this year, it's the Schwarz Etienne Roma Synergy by Kari Voutilainen. Now the standard Roma is 42 millimeters, and Schwarz Etienne of Le Chaux de Fonds, one of the most impressive manufacturers in the business, collaborating with Voutilainen on the size of the case, the fabrication of the dial, and the finishing of the movement. Schwarz Etienne makes its own escapements, balances, and hairsprings, meaning they're not just a movement manufacturer, they are the real deal. Kari Voutilainen specified a 39mm case, smaller than the standard Roma, and then Complemine Cadran, which is his dial factory, makes this dial. We have applique, tri-Arabic numerals, as well as indices. We have faceted alpha-style hands at center, and then 3 different guilloche cuts. The dial is made of solid sterling silver 925, precious metal. A rose lathe then cuts a sunburst pattern under the hour track, fish scales at the center, and what's called a vague or wave pattern in the small seconds. That is a separate disc there. Now you can also see that there's a differentiation between the slate gray blue of the center and the more conventional cobalt metallic of the outer dial. This is beautifully and excruciatingly handmade, but it gets even better. The ASC 200 movement on the reverse side, you can see this is number 17 of 50. There will be 50 with a blue dial, 50 with a gray dial. Custom dials are available. This example here showing the engine turning completed on the bridges by Atelier Voutilainen. So the work here, the waves across the Rayonnet, those are all done by conventional rose lathe guilloche, cut the same way the dial is cut, only on movement components. There is mirrored chamfer by hand on the edge of the bridges, and my favorite detail, the solarization of the ratchet wheel. You can also see that the click and click spring structures entirely black polished, all screw heads black polished, hand finishing with beveling, satination, and media blasting, all 3 on the micro rotor winding system, and then 2 sizes of engine turning on the base plate. You can also see, in addition to the solarization on the ratchet wheel, there is a mirrored well surrounding the screw that holds the click spring in place above, or I should say the ratchet wheel in place above the barrel. It beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and it runs extraordinarily accurate. It has an 86-hour power reserve, so this is both a remarkable time teller and an extraordinary work of art. Now, I can get these watches on a one-off basis for clients who are interested. This will not be a WatchBox used watch. If you order these from me, these will be new watches. They will come with warranty. And as I mentioned, if you wish, the custom dials are available. Retail is about $29,000 right now. So reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com if you want to own one of these extraordinary Roma Synergy watches by Kari Voutilainen. Again, 86-hour power reserve micro rotor automatic from a true manufacturer and an underrated independent. This is one of the coolest brands in the business with absolutely first-class customization by Voutilainen, a rare collaborative effort. And you can see 39 millimeters, it wears beautifully on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. Sticking with independent horology, because you know I love it, here's a watch launched in late 2018 for the 2019 model year. This is the Grönefeld Brothers 1941 Principia Automatic. 39.5 millimeters. This is the stainless steel model. You can see that 1941 case, as they call it, different from their prior 43 millimeter watches, and that is tidier at 39.5, but it's also a lot thinner, and you can see it has lovely details like the swell of the bezel at 6 and 12, the hollow and the concave profile of the bezel at 3 and 9, and then the recesses of the lug profiles, which come to lovely fluted points on their top. Even the crown, as you can see, is conical, deeply knurled, branded, and bespoke. It is a sensational looking case with a dial to match. Now, you could say this is salmon, and that's what Grönefeld describes it, but I would say it's more like Dutch orange, as these are made in Oldenzaal in the Netherlands, one of the few watch brands doing so. Everything about this dial is special. You can see sunken small seconds, sunken center. There is a polished chaptering for the center dial as well as the small seconds. The printing is blue on salmon with a lovely granular finish. You can see the hands at center are alpha style, fired blue with a black polished center and black polished cannon pinion on which the hands are mounted. The individual indices are finished by hand with mirror polishing and micrometric faceting. They twinkle like cut gems. Turn it all over, and you have the Grönefeld Brothers' first ever automatic movement. Automatic winding, 56-hour power reserve. The bridges are made of stainless steel, and this is truly special stuff. But the bridge is made of stainless steel. You can see that they have 3 different types of finishing. I'll get a little bit closer here. But the finishing is media blasted inboard, and then you can see there is satination across the edges. There are these little rims as the edge of the bridges have been very narrowly satinated. Then you get to the edge of the bridge and you can see that there is a traditional rounded mirrored anglage, truly special stuff. You can see that mirrored shine, absolutely bewitching and broad, and the fact that it's done on steel rather than brass or German silver, speaking to the Grönefeld brothers' uncompromising approach to finishing watches. They do it because it's hard and because the result is spectacular. Note the shape of the bridges. They have a bell gable profile to remind you of the roofs of traditional Dutch houses. That's the idea there. And then we have the pivot jewels set in golden chaton to recall the pocket watch era of traditional horology. All of this 6-position adjusted, one more than a standard chronometer, and beautifully executed in every detail. These are graduates of Audemars Piguet Renoir Papi, the Grönefeld brothers, which means their standards were those of AP's elite division, and they still do some finishing work for AP today. You can see there are several different finishes on the rotor at center with these lovely points, and there is mirrored beveling on the side, there's the satination along the edge of the bridge, and then there's polishing on the letters and the logo, and then media blasting, or this may even be wire brush chiseling inboard. So this is an extravagantly finished movement in a deceptively simple watch that wears beautifully. You can see it has a factory Grönefeld strap, orange on the bottom, blue on the top, a lovely suede nubuck texture, and then a contrasting matching salmon stitch. A really good looking watch. It's short across the wrist and wears well on a small wrist. I could say you could wear this watch even if your wrist is as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. A truly special timepiece from a brand that only makes about 50 to 60 watches a year and has seen its star rise in every one of the last 10 years. They are now moving on par with the likes of the Voutilainens of the world. Not quite up there with Dufour, not quite yet, but then again, they have a more intriguing tale to tell. As watchmaking brothers, I would put them up on par with the likes of Kari, FP Journe. They deserve to be there, and possibly in the years to come beyond, as, let's face it, 60 watches a year is far fewer than the 900 plus made by Journe. And now, not one, but two spectacular IWC Portuguese. This model, made from 2013 to 2017, is the 546305 Portuguese Tourbillon. As you can see, it is a limited edition of 100 pieces, just over 11 millimeters thick, 43 millimeters in diameter. It is broad, it is flat, it is gorgeous. Rose gold with a blue dial, and as you can see, a flying tourbillon with a overcoil hairspring made by hand, a flying tourbillon because there's no upper bridge to block your view of the mechanism, and then it beats away at a vintagey 19,800 vibrations per hour with a 54-hour power reserve. Now the watch is gorgeous. Applique rose gold indices, rose gold numerals, blue sunburst dial, a little shock of red, a huge open, voluminous view of that tourbillon, which gives the dial incredible depth. The tourbillon also acts as a second seconds hand for the dial. Flip it all over, caliber 98-900 with spectacular finish, a ripple-like wave pattern emanating out from the base of the tourbillon. You can see there is a solid gold medallion under the tourbillon. We have those lovely coat in ripple form. We have satination on the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel with an extravagant pocket watch inspired click spring, and you can really see that click detent draws out from its housing. This watch is powered by a pocket watch base, as the original Portuguese of 1939 would have been. That reference 325 pocket watch powered for the sake of accuracy, because at the time, if you wanted an accurate wristwatch, you needed a pocket watch movement to do it. So it was the first purpose-built oversized wristwatch, and this follows in its footsteps. 21 jewels, 5 position adjusted, and as you can see, golden chaton fitting the individual pivot jewels. The finishing here is a higher grade than what you'll find on a standard IWC watch. It is very special, equipped with a full matching rose gold clasp, throwing it on the wrist, comfortable, broad, and flat. It's remarkably graceful. Don't be fooled by its size. It fits easily under a cuff. It's handsome, wide, stanced, and appropriate to the heritage of the Portuguese, which has always been large. Petite is not the look. This is a watch designed with the form follows function ethic of the late 30s, but in a size that made sense for the sake of chronometry, and this tourbillon reclaims that purpose, a truly accurate tourbillon regulator. It's also remarkably chatty. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I'm gonna hold it up to the mic. If you like very mechanical watches, that is what the doctor ordered. So here, we have a model built briefly from 2006 to 2009. This one in white gold, as you can see, is a 250-piece limited edition. Intriguingly, both of these IWCs individually numbered. They normally don't do that with limited editions. This is the 5242-05, 43 millimeters in white gold. It is a second-generation IWC Portuguese minute repeater. Now, the original debuted in the mid-90s, and it uses a minute repeater module on the dial side created by Audemars Piguet's Renault Papi division. So it has impressive high horology pedigree, and on the reverse side, caliber 95290, another IWC pocket watch caliber, and you can see this truly is an IWC pocket watch caliber, immense at over 36 millimeters across. This movement is bigger than a whole Rolex Datejust. It also features a enormous hacking lever. You can actually see it moving as it stops the balance. The balance beaten away in a very vintagey 18,000 vibrations per hour, all of this with a manual wind 43-hour power reserve. Again, the finishing you'll find here, especially the mirrored anglage on the regulator and the bridge profiles, as good as anything you will find in high horology, and significantly above the level you get with a standard IWC watch. Pocket watch architecture, you have your crown wheel, your ratchet wheel, you have your barrel, the arbor sitting in the first of the golden chaton, and then a center wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, escape wheel with individual finger bridges for the third wheel and the escape wheel, or I should say for the fourth wheel and the escape wheel. Black polished micrometric regulator, a handmade overcoil. This is a gorgeous and rare opportunity to own an IWC that is built as well as any Longa, as any Vacheron. It has what they call the ardoise or sunburst gray dial, and all in white gold. It has a satisfying weight to it, and I'm going to do my best to set this extraordinary timepiece to 12:59, because that is how you get the most out of your minute repeater. You set it to 12:59, chiming the hours, the quarters after the hour, and then the minutes after the quarter, and hopefully I got this one dead on and I didn't overrun to 1 o'clock. Boom, still got it. All right, as you can see, it comes with a full white gold clasp. This model is very special, the ultimate in stealth wealth. Gray dial, white metal case, low profile, simple, 3 hands, and yet a minute repeater. A combination of extraordinary finish and high horology pedigree for both the module and the base caliber. This is as good as it gets in the world of the Portuguese, and it is the Portugueser I would most love to own. Guys, reach out to me whether you want something like this or something like this. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Email me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Have a great weekend. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.